Sonic the Hedgehog, more than most other game series, has seen many fan games throughout its 31-year life. Sega's greater tolerance and even support for fan-made works compared to companies like Nintendo, as well as the often lacking quality of official Sonic titles, has encouraged many dedicated fans to try to make Sonic games of their own. So let's take a look at a few of these games to see how well the fans can replicate the official Sonic titles. Sonic 2 HD goes to show how much better Mania could have looked if it had gone with an HD art style. Sonic 2 HD is a port of Sonic 2 to PC, built from the ground up with beautiful HD visuals. To be honest, this is probably the best classic Sonic has ever looked. Sonic and Tails both have far more fluid animations than they ever could on a Mega Drive. Walking, running, jumping, even a new animation for when the characters have reached top speed. Everything has been smoothed out and looks incredible. The other assets have also all seen a gigantic facelift. The enemies appear far more lively than they did before, even including wind-up animations for some attacks. The levels look gorgeous, with lots of detail and new lighting. The effects are really nice, with the lava and explosions being highlights. My favorite graphical change, however, is Dr. Robotnik. His updated design is top-notch, and his animations, much like everything else in this game, look smooth and polished. I really like how he laughs when you take a hit, and it is fun to see the unique ways his machines will blow up in his face every time you take him down. The graphics might be the main difference between this and the Mega Drive game, but Team S2HD went much further in order to make this the definitive version of the game. The music has been remixed and no longer sounds like Mega Drive tracks. These remixes are my personal favorite versions of these songs, especially Hilltop Zone. A song that was once extremely annoying is now pretty good actually. To be honest, Sonic 2 never had one of my favorite Sonic OSTs, but this remake goes a long way in improving the original songs. The controls are slightly different compared to the original title, but I don't think it'll be too noticeable for anyone but the biggest Sonic 2 fans. S2HD is easily one of my favorite fan-made 2D Sonic games, and it's the best way to experience the original Emerald Hill, Chemical Plant, and Hilltop zones. Only those 3 zones though, unfortunately. A trend you might notice with Sonic fan games is that they tend to not be completed, which can be disappointing if you find one you really like only to learn that there isn't much there for you to experience. Nevertheless, S2HD is a really good fan game, and you should certainly try it out if you enjoy the original title. Sonic Roboblast 2 is a 3D Sonic fan game that was originally from 1998, and seems to have a positive reception from Sonic fans. However, I have personally always been more ambivalent about it. Before I explain why that is, let's start off with some positives. The game looks fine. I'm not usually a fan of classic Sonic in 3D, but for a game that started development before Sonic Adventure was even released internationally, I'm okay with it here. The game features some original level themes that are accompanied by new music, which is mostly pretty enjoyable. While you do get the usual grassy plains, underwater ruins, and chemical plant-inspired zones, you also have a space station, a western-styled stage with abandoned mines and railways, and my favorite level, Castle Eggman. It's a murky, rainy forest stage with a gigantic fortress that has been completely taken over by Eggman's forces. The details of the stage are what makes it my favorite. The dark lighting really sells Eggman's influence, and the extreme overabundance of Robotnik banners and statues is just the icing on the cake. Abandoned castle or not, Eggman owns this place, and he wants you to know that, which is very much in line with how he acts in the official Sonic titles. So far, everything about this game seems really good. However, it all begins to crumble when we get to the controls. Roboblast 2's controls are, at best, subpar. Sonic feels extremely slippery, no matter what the situation, and landing on platforms becomes much harder because of that. Oftentimes, I found myself failing harder jumps or missing out on higher pathways, mainly because of how uncontrollable Sonic really is. I was constantly overshooting jumps because of Sonic's ridiculous levels of speed, which will drag the pace of the game to a screeching halt, even if you were lucky enough to not be dropped straight into a pit. And all that is before they bring in the anti-gravity gimmicks. Yeah, good luck. Sonic was just not working well for me, so I also gave Tails and Knuckles a try, to see if their extra moves would help with platforming, given the lacking precision. Knuckles was an immediate non-starter. While his glide did help, it suffers from the same control issues as the rest of the game, and I found myself needing to glide around in a circle several times while I waited for Knuckles to descend. On the other hand, I fared much better with Tails. If it wasn't for his flight ability, I would have most likely never beaten this game. The later platforming just expects far too much from the player, given the small platform size and the state of these controls. The more that I play this game, actually, the more I feel that the game is just way too fast for its own good. Yeah, Sonic should be fast, as that is the whole point. However, the speed should never come at the cost of control or enjoyability, which I would argue is the case in Roboblast 2. The camera, unfortunately, tends to be just as messy as the play control. In many cases, the camera is just extremely unhelpful when it comes to platforming, which was already hard enough as is. Most 3D Sonic games avoid this problem just by having platforming sections that continue in the same direction as the speed sections. Even when platforming areas became more complex, the camera would usually either pull back or choose a more desirable angle to assist the player. Roboblast 2, on the other hand, doesn't give these issues much thought. The camera also has a tendency to bug out whenever Sonic is going through a scripted sequence, mainly these tubes. Generally though, the camera is okay enough to be workable, but is nevertheless frustrating. Overall, while I wouldn't exactly call the controls terrible, they are far from ideal in most cases, and make the game much less fun to play. Because the controls are so clunky, the level design really needed to pick up the slack. So, does it? Well, kind of. The first 4 worlds, I would say, are mostly solid. Running around, platforming, and interacting with stage gimmicks was consistently enjoyable for me in these zones. I mentioned earlier how much I enjoy the aesthetic of Castle Eggman, but I didn't mention how good the actual level design is. These first 4 worlds are open enough and lenient enough to minimize the frustrations that may have otherwise cropped up. World 5 is the arid canyon zone, and it's okay. I had an annoying time trying to grab onto these pulleys, but other than that, it is fine for what it is. The moment you reach Zone 6, Red Volcano Zone, however, Sonic Roboblast 2's quality tanks, and sadly, it never recovers. Annoying, pace-breaking gimmicks are abundant in these stages. Multiple paths weave in and out of each other in a way that is hard to comprehend, and these levels are just the ultimate proof that these controls are not up to scratch. I mentioned the anti-gravity gimmick, which was already bad, but it only gets better when the ceiling also becomes a bottomless pit. Bottomless pits also become way too common around the 5th zone, which is frustrating, as many times I was falling into them for reasons that didn't feel like my fault. So, how about the boss fights? Honestly, they're quite good. The boss against Fang the Sniper is, well, it's bad. But the other bosses are all interesting to take on, requiring you to be attentive to their attack patterns and decipher the safest times to strike. Some bosses are more difficult and are based on reaction time and knowing the best time to get in hits, whereas other boss fights play out like puzzles that require you to figure out the means by which to open up the boss for attack. The boss arenas don't give you any rings, meaning that you need to be careful to conserve the 10 rings you start with. A quality selection of bosses overall, I'd say. I suppose the final thing to address is the special stages. These are based off of another Sega game actually, Nights into Dreams. I have never played Nights into Dreams, so I don't have much to say about these, besides the fact I would much rather play these stages compared to any of the special stages in the classic Sonic games, besides maybe those of Sonic CD. Overall, Sonic Roboblast 2 is, in my opinion at least, kind of a mixed bag. It hits some incredibly high highs. I enjoy almost all of the boss fights, the special stages are creative, the level themes are really inspired, the music is a great listen, and the graphics are rather appealing for a fan game. The first 4 zones contain well-designed and fast-paced stages that are fun to blast through, and Castle Eggman is a genuinely awesome stage that I really enjoyed. On the other hand, however, the lows this game hits at its worst really do drag it down for me quite a bit. The controls and camera, while certainly functional, are frustrating in many cases and will lead to many nigh unavoidable deaths that only serve to annoy. The level design, while good early on, goes downhill in the game's back half, with overcomplicated pathways, trial and error hazards, confusing navigation, and a dreadful anti-gravity gimmick. While most of the bosses are really good, Fang the Sniper is an annoying boss that feels more like total luck than skill on a first playthrough. Finally, while any character is viable early on, first-time players are basically required to play as Tails if they want to stand any chance against the trials this game will put you through in its back half. I would definitely recommend this game to anyone who hasn't tried it yet, because there really is a lot to appreciate here. Just know going in that the game is quite rough around the edges, and I think you will get at least some enjoyment from it. On to the final game of today's video, Virtua Sonic. I should preface this section by saying that the footage you are seeing doesn't do the experience of playing it justice. Virtua Sonic is a virtual reality title, where you play as Sonic grinding on rails, running around loops, rolling down hills, and smashing robots. Because of that, the game looks pretty bad in flat screen footage because of how jittery the head movements in first-person camera can be, despite the game actually looking quite nice in VR. On top of that, I had lowered the resolution of my monitor to 720p to try and improve performance. It didn't really make much of a difference, at least it didn't seem to in the recordings, but that really isn't the game's fault. So, let's move on to gameplay. If you were expecting a game that was designed with VR in mind, with less intense gameplay or simplified mechanics, then you will be surprised to learn that this is a 3D Sonic fan game through and through. You platform over ledges, grind on rails, homing attack badniks, run super fast, and even speed through loops. Surprisingly enough, This game was made on a version of Hedge Physics, which is a 3D Sonic codebase developed by Lake Fepard. The most well-known title to use Hedge Physics is probably Spark the Electric Jester 2, which was also made by Lake Fepard. Anyways, Virtua Sonic being developed on that codebase essentially means that all of the aspects you'd expect from a Sonic game are present. You interact with hills just like in the classic games, slowing down when running up a steep incline and speeding up when coming out of a loop or barreling down a ramp. While it is really cool to have such an authentic Sonic experience in VR, however, the inevitable inaccessibility that comes along with that will most certainly stop some people from being able to enjoy this game. Most VR games are designed in a way where the first-person camera isn't moving, or where the movement is slow enough to keep motion sickness to a minimum. Virtua Sonic, as a faithful recreation of 3D Sonic gameplay in VR, really couldn't do too much to prevent motion sickness. Even at its best, when the movement is fairly smooth and the frame rate is high, you are still moving at incredibly high speeds, with set pieces and terrain zipping past you in a split second, or even running through loops. Much of the time, though, that best-case scenario is hardly in effect. Whether you are moving all around on light dash paths or on rails, homing attacking through enemies, repeatedly jumping or bouncing off of springs, or even dealing with some janky collision detection, you are very likely to start to feel at least a little dizzy by the end. And you would better hope that you don't slam into an enemy or wall, lest your movement come to an immediate and unpredictable halt. To be honest, I usually don't suffer from virtual sickness, even in the most intense VR games. But even then, this game was just not sitting well with me after I finished my first playthrough. And that is a real shame, not only because I think the idea of a Sonic game in VR is so cool, but also because this is a really solid fan game in its own right. Firstly, I found myself enjoying the story quite a bit. Basically, Eggman's forces have taken over an otherwise peaceful Chow Garden, and have also captured Cream's Chow, cheese. Yeah, it's simple, but it is good for what it is. It's complicated enough to suffice, considering the relatively short length of this game, and effectively motivates gameplay, all the while being somewhat unique from the stories of many other games. The voice acting really surprised me with how good it is. The performance of Dr. Eggman is definitely my favorite, as the actor does an excellent job portraying the character. He sounds far more like the Eggman from the adventure games rather than modern Eggman, which I do really like. Sonic, Tails, and Cream were also given solid performances. Every line is delivered well, and nothing stuck out as off-putting. I guess the only complaint I have for the voice acting is that Cream's voice sounds much older than you'd expect, especially given the fact that she is canonically only 6 years of age, but that really is just a nitpick. The game's biggest strength is the level design. I'm usually not a fan of multiple pathways in my platforming stages. Generally, I find that simpler is often better, for 3D and 2D levels, whenever the goal is just to reach the end. Two of my favorite games, Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus, and Super Monkey Ball Deluxe, are very straightforward and focused, which leads into more deliberate design. Even in another one of my favorite games, Spark the Electric Jester 2, it was usually just a straight shot to the end, and even then, my favorite stages were the more linear ones. Thankfully, Virtua Sonic handles multiple pathways remarkably well. Generally, there is only one main path forward, and branching paths take the form of tricky-to-reach shortcuts. These are usually accessible through platforming sections, but can also be behind hard-to-reach rails or light dash trails. Luckily though, no matter what path you choose to take, you are always interacting with the core game's mechanics, by running fast, destroying enemies, and spin-dashing up slopes. Even the boss fight is basically a stage itself that tests your ability to maintain constant speed and land attacks on the robot. It even retains the smart usage of harder-to-reach pathways that, in this case, could get you to max speed to have an easier time catching the boss. Overall, the design of this game is incredibly solid, and really surprised me considering that this is a virtual reality Sonic fan game. Unfortunately, all of this comes with one small problem. It really doesn't ruin the game, but the controls are rather finicky. To be clear, many of the actions feel good to perform. Running is done by holding down 2 movement buttons on each hand controller and swinging your arms back and forth, which I found to sell the sense of speed and feel more fun compared to just using the thumbstick. Light dashing is mapped to the grip buttons and always worked across my 2 playthroughs, something I couldn't say about any official Sonic titles. Once you've reached a high enough speed, you can stick your arms out in front of you to reach max velocity, allowing you to cover great distances with ease and even run across the surface of water. So far, so good. The problems start to show with the jump. You push in the 2 triggers and swing your arms down. It works, for the most part, but in situations where you need to be able to reliably set it off fast, it is just inconsistent enough to be somewhat irritating. The homing attack is activated by quickly swinging both of your arms back at the same time. While this worked some of the time, it was an annoyance throughout most of the game, especially in the in-game boss fight, as I found it failing to activate in many cases where I actually needed it to go off. The worst mechanics, however, are the roll and spin dash. For the roll, you cross your arms across your chest while running. The spin dash is the same idea, except you activate it while standing still and you need to press the triggers to charge it up. Fine in theory, but I swear this just doesn't work. You have to be so accurate with your hand placements and keep them there for a reasonable period of time, and even the slightest deviation seems to completely throw the game. Now, to be totally fair, I don't want to put all of the blame on the game here, as my headset's tracking could only serve to exacerbate the issue. I'm not using a Valve Index or Vario Arrow, and if you are, then your experience might be better. However, if you are using an Oculus Quest 2 like I am, or perhaps an HP Reverb G2, then you may experience annoying tracking issues that might stem from the limits of inside-out tracking. Either way, it would have been nice for some of the controls to have been simplified to accommodate 6DoF inside-out controller tracking. Virtua Sonic really is an awesome Sonic fan game. It manages to bring Sonic into VR in a faithful form, all the while being a solid game in its own right. The physics are good, the level design is high quality, the story is original with good animations and voice acting, the enemies, abilities, and set pieces you'd expect are all accounted for, and the graphics are appealing in VR. I do think that the finicky controls and potential for motion sickness are issues that could hurt the overall experience for some players, which is unfortunate. Overall, though, Virtua Sonic is a great game, and one that anybody with a VR headset and a strong stomach should check out. Obviously, these are not the only Sonic fan games out there, not even close, and I mean really not even close. There are hundreds, possibly even thousands in existence, and I have played quite a lot of them over the years. I would enjoy revisiting this topic in the future to cover more Sonic fan games, although for now, I plan to move on to reviewing other games. I have not yet decided as to what that entails, but I have some ideas, and I hope you'll stick around. Oh, yeah, and that next video won't take half a year to come out. Sorry about that. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time I decide to upload, I guess.